Welcome back, everybody. This is the Artificial Intelligence live stream where we talk about everything related to AI, Gen AI, LLMs, machine learning. It's all good here. Today, we've got an amazing guest who I have spoken with a whole bunch of times in the past, and that is Hilary Mason. I'm going to give her a chance to introduce herself in just a moment. But if you look back in my archives 2 years ago, I think it was April of 2 years ago, I had my first conversation with Hilary back when I was doing YouTube videos. And by the way, there's a reason I'm not doing YouTube videos anymore and we do this live. It's because it allows you to ask questions live. So, you're just trickling in. We got 27 people already, but if you're watching this in replay, take this as your prompt to come back to us on one of the live episodes because you get to ask questions and actually be part of the community. And I'm also accompanied here by Oscar, who keeps us on track and does cool things like that opening video animation. I think, Oscar, that was a callback to Tolkien and the Door to Moria. Am I right?
Well, I don't know why you'd ever get that by looking at that hidden door.
Hidden door goes with it. It's all part of one continuum. But I immediately thought of that. What was the secret password? Melon or something to hello friend, speak friend and enter. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, in any case, we're here to talk about AI and less about Tolkien and more about Hilary. And I'm John Radoff. I'm your host for this program. I'm the CEO of a company called Beamable. We make infrastructure for live games. So if you need servers and multiplayer and social systems and online economies, that's what we do. We help you get online with your game. But let's talk about Hilary. Hilary, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you got into all this. What is your background? Probably most people didn't watch our video from 2 years ago yet, but recommend that you maybe go back, look at it for context. Hilary, introduce yourself.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and chat for an hour. It's going to be a blast. I'm Hilary Mason. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Hidden Door. And Oscar, I love the door. Thank you. That was rad. And I am by background a computer scientist. I studied machine learning, became a professor of computer science, realized I was extremely mediocre at that, but really liked breaking and playing video games. And then started a company, moved back to New York, which is where I grew up and where I am right now. And I've been working around startups ever since. So I was on the first team for a company that became Bitly, so like short links across social media back in 2009. Was the chief scientist there. We had a lot of, let's say, company startup adventures. Like I have stories about that. But I became very, very interested in studying and essentially building products in that space where there's some new technical capability. And it opens up this surface area of products and businesses you can now build that just weren't feasible or weren't possible before. So after Bitly, had a bunch of other adventures. In 2014, I started a company called Fast Forward Labs, which was an applied AI research and product development company. And what we did was our own program of machine learning research, had a whole bunch of researchers on the team. And then we sold access to that research to other companies, and then we would build products with them and we'd advise them on questions of strategy. I felt like basically like CTO or CEO therapy was really the core. That was the pain we were solving with that business, helping people really reason through how do I think about my business in the context of data, machine learning, AI? What's the possibility space? What makes sense? How do you do this well? How do I get the right people on staff? That company was acquired by Cloudera. I don't know if anyone in this audience will be familiar with them, but they're a data platform vendor. So like all your data in the data center, lots of Fortune 500 customers. And I ran their machine learning AI business unit for some years. And then my co-founder and I started Hidden Door. And this company really we started 5.5 years ago, if you can believe it. And this came out of we had built several products with language generation, with embeddings at that point, and they hallucinate, they go wrong, they go weird. And Hidden Door really came out of this personal love of role-playing games, of like open world RPGs, which like Fallout 4 remains one of my favorite games of all time. I was a DM mostly through grad school, like running a variety of different systems. And the fact that this tech, like I thought we were just at the beginning of the window 5.5 years ago, where it was possible to start to build some of those like really magical improvisational experiences you have around a table with friends, to do it uh, in it online. And so we started Hidden Door to explore that. And here we are today. And should I tell you what we do? Or
let's dive into it. And by the way, Hilary has some really great content online. I think before I even met you, I saw this video you did with Wired about the 5 levels of machine learning. Pretty fun video. I won't ask you the 5 levels of Hidden Door because I'm not going to steal their shtick. But could we start through the lens of what is the player going to care about, right? Like we have a tendency to talk about AI as a cool gadget we can use in game development, and maybe some neat things that game developers can do to speed up development. But you're using AI in the loop of the experience. It's actually inherent to how people are going to play the game. Why am I as a player going to care, and what kind of new experiences am I going to have?
Yeah, so what you can do on Hidden Door is you've just finished a book, you just watched a movie, it was awesome. Now you can go make your own character in that world and then role play your own stories that are true to the rules of the world. You can even meet some of the canon characters from the original movie or the original show along the way and have your own interactions with them. You can try to date them, you can try to kill them, you can, take it wherever you want to take it within the rules that are set. And so what we're doing is like trying to create the experience. The guiding star is that if your favorite author or favorite showrunner could come sit with you around a table and run a session of a game for you, where you're role playing and they're making up a whole new set of scenarios and everything in the world is responding the way it should. And it's got the right balance of tension and challenge and comedy and sort of like build up and resolution. We're creating that experience for fans. And we do it in partnership with the authors and creators. So, we're doing it in a way that is officially blessed.
Very cool. So I've had the great fortune and just luck of working with a bunch of great authors in my career. So I worked with George R. R. Martin to launch a Game of Thrones game back in the day. And it was always really important for us to bring across the authenticity of his world. It's sort of how we differentiate ourselves. We didn't use any AI, like literally no AI of any kind in this game. But I remember in my first meeting with George, where I demoed the game, I showed him the game and I think he liked it. He was like, very interesting, but are you killing people off enough in this game?
Well, having read and then also seen the show, like I can imagine he would ask that.
So Hilary, it sounds like this idea of working with authors is really central to this, though. So you're going after the fans of certain IP. I'm just curious if there's anything you can share on that. Would love to know what's coming or hint at it or whatever. But just curious, like, what do you look for in authors as well? Like, is it just big audiences? Is it certain kinds of worlds? Is it anything?
Yeah, no, those are great questions, because for us, the most interesting worlds are the ones where you can imagine more than one character's story in that world. And the world itself is almost a character. The world is really interesting. It has some twist on the tropes or the rules. And it can be a real world setting, but something has to be a little different or fun. The books that don't work well for us are ones in which most of the narrative transformation happens in one character's head. Or where the world itself is deliberately bland so that the character and the changes and relationships really shine. So we really love worlds that are distinct. And like you said, you worked on this Game of Thrones game, and you should know within 10 seconds that you're in the Game of Thrones world. And we spend a lot of time thinking about like what are the words that someone should say to really feel like you're in this world, even if you're sort of in the, the shoe store of the world, you're not in like the main battlefield or wherever the main action is happening. um and then the size of the fandom, like, sure, everybody wants to work with huge fandoms, but we've actually found that the most interesting fandoms are the ones that are alive. And it can be relatively pretty small. Like maybe there are a few thousand people in a fanfic community. Maybe it's the kind of thing where you get a lot of fan art on Tumblr and Instagram, or Reddit, but it doesn't have to be huge. And the reason is that there are some fandoms that are large but kind of bland. Like I would almost give the example of like the movie Avatar and the world of Pandora being a super interesting world, but the fandom is not, like, I don't see people walking around New York with their Pandora shirts on, whereas I do for Star Wars, or I do for like even some books that are like, oh, you read that thing that came out 10 years ago and now you're still wearing that t-shirt, like that's exciting. Or even Game of Thrones, everybody loves, right?
I mean, what we looked for similar things in our worlds, in that if you look at the like Game of Thrones, you can imagine that you could be virtually any person in that world and they would have an interesting story to tell. Star Trek, there's an infinity of people that exist in that universe going on adventures. Walking Dead, like every person who survived that long and was facing that has a story to tell. So we were looking for that big world. The difference, though, which is interesting about what you're talking about, is you are not necessarily looking for the 10 or so things in the world with that kind of scale. Like Game of Thrones was 25 million viewers per episode at its peak. It's huge. This is really interesting. If you can use AI essentially as a mechanism to allow more worlds to be made accessible through gaming to the fandom that really cares about that universe. Because normally we'd have to spend millions and millions of dollars, like taking Game of Thrones and making it any version of that game. This is different here. Does this open up new markets for games and maybe authors who have content that normally wouldn't be at the top of the options list for studios?
Yeah, I think you've figured it out. This is one of our tricks, is that because of the nature of the way the platform works, our development timelines are really small, and the cost to bring something out to market is relatively very modest. And by that I mean that, and I'm happy to talk in more depth. I can geek out about this stuff forever, so I don't want to monopolize sort of our whole space here. But the way our platform works at a very high level is that we have representations of sort of narrative arcs and tropes and what beats ought to happen. And these are structures that we're all familiar with, like a heist, right? So like this is one of my favorites to play. Where it's like, cool, you need to like have a thing you want to go after and a motivation for it. And usually it's personal. You need to get your team together. You need to have a plan. There's usually a montage of you practicing to like defeat whatever those security measures are. You actually have to go to do the heist. Something has to go wrong, but it actually ends up being in the best interests of the plot. But the reader or the player isn't quite sure in that moment how it's going to play out. And then it has to get resolved in the end in a way that's really satisfying, either successfully, and you have your Fast and the Furious style family barbecue, or you're now like on the run and it's setting up for the next story, which is where you're gonna like get your revenge or wherever it may be, right? But the trick is that these tropes are very universal. So a heist in a sci-fi world or a heist in a more romance-oriented world still use the same narrative beats of the heist. And what we do is combine tropes dynamically with the world we're in, and then the players' characters and their choices. And so it's very, very possible with Hidden Door to be like, hey, I'm in Pride and Prejudice, and I'm playing, by the way, with this vampire twist. So it's supernatural Pride and Prejudice, and Mr. Darcy's a vampire, and we are in love. And now we're going on a heist, and now we're in the car chase scene. So it's going to be like a hansom cab race where Darcy's getting like burned by the sun, and we're trying to get, you can imagine how all these pieces come together. Coming back around to the timelines, because we have pre-written, our narrative team has written out these tropes. What we do when we bring a new work to the platform is sort of say, okay, is there anything in this that we don't represent well, or that we really want to focus on making better? And then how do we represent this world to make it the best that it can possibly be? So when can the player enter the world? What kind of character can they play? Do we have rules about that? What kinds of scenarios should they encounter by default? Like we always write down, like, what does a excellent experience look like? And then let's say we have a player who's like, honestly, like, I just want to flirt with everybody and see how far I can go. How do we make that experience great within the boundaries that this world is going to enforce? Or what if they go the other way, where they're like, I'm just going to, come into every scenario and try to mess things up. And so we sort of lean really hard into the combinatorial and probabilistic nature of the underlying tech to let our players bring their ideas and their direction. The systems sort of provide the scaffolding, and then the original creator, who has the vision, to sort of set both the setting and the sort of ground it, and then also set the limits for where they want people to be able to take it, which characters you can meet, how those characters must behave, and all that stuff. And then we don't use AI art. So the game is primarily a text and sort of card-based experience. And then we also, if we're bringing a new world online, we will usually commission art for that world. Mm-hmm. So that is one thing that takes a little bit of time to get right, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've touched on the technology a little bit. Since this is the artificial intelligence live stream and not only game development, I'd love to dig into the tech. So when we talked a couple of years ago, there were a couple of things that stood out about how you were thinking about the technology at the time. And one was just, you were actually not using, if I recall correctly, a large language model. You were creating a much more optimized language system around AI for allowing players to interact. And I think a lot of it may have been economic and performance optimization and things like that. The other part that stood out was linking the language interface with the data persistence engine. So an issue with ChatGPT, for example, although its memories have gotten more extensive, if you continue to use it today, it's not really like a data persistence system. It doesn't really like associate where were you in the world, what was your inventory, and bring that into like a multiplayer space. And you were thinking a lot about that. So the persistent world elements plus the optimization required, which makes it much more practical to actually deliver. So that's the context. The questions really are, how are you still thinking about that 2 years later? Has any of that changed? Have you continued to double down on that? And how does that sit relative to like some of the LLMs that people may now be familiar with, like ChatGPT with the O3 model or 4.0, and some of these things that have gotten really, really quite sophisticated in terms of what they're capable of doing?
Yeah, no, this is a great question, and I'm really impressed by your memory, honestly. So we do use LLMs. We try to use specific ones, fine-tuned and optimized for specific tasks. Though I will say we can do everything we are doing today without them as well, and I know how to do that. We can talk about that too. Let's go around to your other question, like why do something like Hidden Door instead of just opening up ChatGPT or whatever your favorite model is and playing directly? And I think there is definitely a lot of fun you can have doing that. However, it is not a game. And specifically, it lets you, even if you are very clear about these are the boundaries of the kinds of experience I want, or the kind of game I want to be playing with you, it still lets you push them in ways that are it has this sort of like both slightly obsequious but slightly condescending way of managing a lot of its communication.
Not a real
And
dungeon master. It's not going to enforce
no,
boundaries and real rules, and you can kind of get clever and jailbreak it and get what you want.
yes. And also, it doesn't like an LLM is fundamentally pulling all of this data in, compressing the representation of relationships between bits of it. And then when you ask for something, it is prompted in a way that it sort of pulls a new representation out. And so it is like aspirationally going to spew mediocrity at you. It is not going to surprise you too much. And like it can be used to make fun things, but I think it's more on the side of being a writing tool and a toy than itself a game. And our players want a game. They want there to be rules. They want to be immersed. They want to be told no sometimes, or that wink of like, I see what you're doing, and I'm gonna like pull you back onto the path of where I want you to go, or be like, okay, cool, let's open up a whole new side story, the way a really great GM would. Um, and so, I think there are no like right or wrong decisions here, but there are a spectrum of product design choices one can make, from it is a video game or a game of some kind or a game with rules and restrictions and constraints, all the way over to actually we're making a word processor, we're making a writing tool. And none of these are good or bad, but we want them for different reasons. I will also say that, because I think we're going to get there anyway, there's a lot of people walking around being like, AI can give us limitless stories, infinite stories. And I always feel like, we don't need more stories. If you've ever been on the fanfic parts of the internet, like there are so many stories. More is not good. What is good is personal, fun, meaningful things I can share with you that we have a shared experience with. So the social element of the game too is really important. So these are the product design and game design decisions we've made at Hidden Door to really think about how do we give you, the player, the world building game where in our case, it is a card-based metaphor where you are creating, collecting, and achieving access to cards that represent the people, places, and things in the world. And you're collecting them in a deck, and you can share things out of that deck. And then you also have the role-playing component where you're changing the things in the deck in really meaningful ways. And you're also like deep in a story from one character's point of view. And so for us, it is really thinking about, if that's our vision, just sort of going to an LLM is not going to get you there. So what do we do to get you there instead? I'll come back around to your question about architecture, right? We have an architecture that relies very much on these pre-written narrative beats and tropes, and then we break up every turn of the game into somewhere around 16 to 20 different machine learning tasks, some of which we use homemade classifiers for. So again, I am super old, so these are the kinds of things that you can type in like, I drink from this glass of water, or I throw this glass of water at the wall or at the guy I don't like. And we'll say, cool, for this character in this setting, in this moment, is that a, impossible action, hard, medium, easy, or an automatic? And that's just a little classifier that sits in RAM, and it's super fast. And then we say, okay, now what happens? Well, where are we in the course of the narrative beats we're playing out? Does it make sense to progress any of them? How do we combine all the different tropes in this room, this moment of story, together into something really compelling? How do we make our NPCs behave in a way that's compelling and exciting and moves the plot along? And one of the choices we've made, by the way, is that we don't have a chatbot in the game at all. Like, you cannot have endless conversations with an NPC in a Hidden Door game. There are plenty of other places you can go if you want to just chat with a chatbot loosely skinned as a character. But we decided against that because it very quickly loses the quality of experience we want to have, and it doesn't let you move the plot along. It's like everything pauses. We're going to have a little interaction here. I'm going to start getting bored with you and asking you questions that are not really about this game or this moment, just to test your knowledge or see what I can get it to do. And it's out of the action of the story. So instead, with Hidden Door, you can say like, oh, I ask about, you know, where the silver slippers are, or if anyone's seen the witch. But it's not a chatbot experience. The characters will speak to you. You can ask them other things, but it's more written in the style of a narrative that is always moving things forward. They might say like, I'm not answering that, and then attack you. You know, it's always moving the plot ahead. And this architecture we have, where every turn we're breaking it down into a bunch of tasks handled with different models, algorithms, approaches, much of it for each of them, we're always saying like, what is the best way to get the quality we want out the other end, that it's efficient to run, and that it's interpretable. So we always know at every turn of our game why something has happened. And then at the end of every turn, we store it in a Postgres database, which is our game engine layer, which lets us also do things like, if we want to, we could run a physics simulation, or we could actually do some like mathematical calculations, or we could simulate a space you're in or an action. And then we use that data structure to sort of generate the text and whatever art updates would happen in that turn of the game. This is a really long way to say that we like to decompose everything and solve every problem in parallel, but individually and well, and then bring it all back together into what our players end up experiencing.
So I'm really curious about these social elements that you described. I guess it's a multiplayer component. So people are playing together when they're playing these adventures, or do they play individually?
When you're in a story, you're playing individually, but you can share your version of the world broadly. So I could send you a link to my version of the Pride and Prejudice with the vampire Darcy. And we've really leaned into a model where people build off of other people's creations. So you could take that vampire Darcy and be like, here's how I took him on a date, or like, here's how I got him to, you know, go to this event with me. And then I can take something from your version of that world and pull it back into mine. And the idea is really that we don't want another player to be able to mess up your experience, but we want to give you the ability to show off everything you're creating and get credit for it and have people build on it. So it is
almost like forking the
asocial
experience, and people can take over and fork and see how they experience it from there. Something I'm just curious about is how emergent are these stories? So we might need to even define emergence for the audience, but the idea that a lot of the storylines or the things that happen in gameplay are not extremely predictable from the original state, but maybe in retrospect, you can kind of see how you got there, but you don't know, you wouldn't have known you could get there in advance. Is this a form of emergent gameplay?
Patterns. I think so, in the sense that nothing is on rails. No story, even if you try, even if you made the same character choices and threw the same actions in, nothing happens the same way twice. And we are often
not deterministic either.
By no means.
Even if I try the same inputs, I'm going to end up with a different story.
Yes, and because there are some very simple mechanics, which are, you know, I have this character, you know, let's say in the game I'm like really good at athletics and, you know, really bad at cooking. And then I try to do something that I'm really not that great at. The die roll is going to be harder. There is a roll I succeed or fail, and the outcome is a direct consequence of my character and my choice and, you know, that die roll. And even though it's simple, it really leads to different experiences of the narrative and the overall story in a way that is entirely unpredictable and also very hard to QA sometimes.
So that's interesting. I want to keep coming back to the enabling technology again, just because I think a lot of people who tune into this are just curious about artificial intelligence and which technologies are used when. So I understand what you're describing, where you need to be able to put the experience on rails and have enforceable constraints and the game master, so to speak, that makes sure that the experience remains fun and that it's really a game.
Yep.
Is that something that you can't do really with a LLM like a ChatGPT or a Claude if you give it enough structure around the experience, or even have like an intermediate game layer that invokes LLMs? I just want to get at the heart of like the advantages of the technical underpinnings of what you're doing. And side comments on that, if I remember, is like you're also creating the AI that runs language on your system is also more organized around CPUs, right? It's not a GPU specific technology. If I remember.
So let me think about how to talk through that without going on too long. I think it is what we use the tech for. We really use, I'd say, first, let's talk about like, what do we mean when we say AI here? There's LLMs, we use embeddings extensively. So we do a lot of similarity. We cheat outrageously. So we have a database of tens of thousands of words and phrases with metadata. And every time someone types, I stab him in the eye with a fork, we take every word in that sentence and throw it against that database. We say like, cool, that's an attack. We know that unambiguously an attack. And therefore we have a module that comes in that's like, cool, we're going to run like the attack module on what ought to happen, what the output should be, and the kinds of success or failure outcomes we expect. And then that goes into a system that says, given here's the sort of like component action, here's the outcome, figure out what happens next, like how people react to that in the world and what the consequence should be. And by the way, we're in beat 2 out of 5 of this overall narrative arc. The tension should be rising. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, like a secret goal for where the character should end up, or for some information that should be revealed. So we do have that in the context. And then, by the way, again, we have these tropes in play. This is what has just happened. These characters have their own beliefs and motivations. Make it make sense. So we are using different bits, different algorithms, models, systems for different bits of this, and we cheat wherever we can, because if I know a priori that you are trying to attack or flirt or any of these, like approximately half of the actions people type in map to one sort of unambiguous like bubble of stuff. And if it doesn't map unambiguously, then we go to an embedding and say like, cool, does this similarity, is it sufficient to be like, okay, it's probably 1 or 2 of these? And if it can't do that, then we'll fall back to an LLM and be like, okay, of this option palette, what do you think this player is trying to do here? And so I'm trying to answer your question in a way that's interesting for the audience, which I assume are people really interested in the guts of these systems. Like, how would you build something like this?
Well, can we double click on the embeddings thing before we continue that? So I feel like a third of the audience here has a really great handle on what that is. Maybe we return to the 5 levels of AI that Wired had you on, like between child and teen. Like, explain embeddings like for our audience here, and how that gets applied in a product like yours.
Yeah, so an embeddings model is really one that quantifies the semantic relationship between tokens or words or phrases. And in our case, we use language embeddings extensively, but it lets us put in a sentence and then say, in the embedding space, so we're in this n-dimensional space, what is this closest to? And it will actually spit back. We can compare it to a sentence like, I attack the enemy, I flirt with the enemy, and it will give us a number as to which one it's more similar to, and then we can decide if it meets whatever arbitrary threshold for how to use it. Embeddings are completely underappreciated because they don't generate words. They're just ways to take words or other forms of media, if you're using different embeddings models, and figure out how similar they are. We also use this to pull our art together. So I mentioned we don't do generated art, but we will have artists who will create pieces of art that get tagged with words. And then we use the language embeddings to say, these are the correct art assets based on what we've got to show for this character or this location. And it is a very clever trick. Also, the embeddings models are much, much smaller and can run on your server and not, or your computer, and not, they don't require some sort of expensive API call. And I think it is tremendously underutilized. We also use it in things like pre-generating generic forms of content and mapping into that pre-generated content, and then taking maybe an LLM and saying, okay, now translate this generic sentence into a specific sentence for this character, this story in this moment. And it is a fantastic trick.
So let me check my own knowledge of it. So in embedding, I could think of it as a mathematical representation of some language. And a simple way to think of it is that each of these tokens, the words, are a number representing a vector, which for simplicity's sake, we'll think of it as like array, right? And if it's really different, then those two vectors are far apart. If they get closer and closer together, they're semantically close together in meaning. So I could say I punch the enemy and it knows that I meant attack the enemy.
Right, instead of fruit punch or whatever it may be. The other thing I'll say is the classic example, if folks want to look it up, is look for word to vec, and you'll see people using this example of king plus woman equals queen. So you can use embeddings also to have these analogies that are also really useful when you think about language-based games.
Okay, so let's elevate back up a little bit now. So we're using a language model that's more CPU based. You're using embeddings. You kind of classifying the inputs that the user is providing. How does that come back at me as gameplay and language?
Oh yeah, so you will get a couple sentences of text that'll be like, hey, actually I was just playing a game right before joining this session where I have created our Brooklyn office as a test location. And in this particular scenario, it said you're trapped in a timeshare presentation. You have to escape. And so then I know who my character is. I already made my character. I have her card, her character sheet. And then I get to type in like, okay, I excuse myself to go to the bathroom. And then the game engine updates and says, cool, now you're in the bathroom. The bathroom has its own card. The salesperson follows you in and she says, what are you doing? And you notice there's, a window that you might be able to reach. And then I get to decide, do I yell at her? Do I attack her? Do I try to climb out the window? Do I go back to the main sales room? I set up this particular scene as essentially an escape room, where there's something they're trying to sell you. There's somebody who is motivated to sell it to you at all costs and will not let you leave. They will interpret anything you say as an interest in whatever it is they're selling. Figure it out. And so from the gameplay perspective, you sort of type in whatever you want your character to try. It says, oh, you succeeded or failed, or it was impossible or automatic. And here's what happens next. And we have behind the scenes also a level of tension that'll be rising the longer you go on. The salesperson will be getting more desperate. Let's say you light something on fire, it will start burning and growing because this is fiction. Like we always talk about Chekhov's gun, and at Hidden Door we talk a lot about Chekhov's armory. Like it's Chekhov's salesperson with a gun to your head and the building's on fire, and they really want you to buy that timeshare or whatever it is. I got one this morning with a vicious venture capitalist who wanted to murder me. It was another random scenario.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah, right. So from a gameplay point of view, none of this is stuff a player is aware of or should be thinking about at all. They're really in the mode of like, hey, I'm playing this character in this story and I have my goal, which is, you have an objective, your objective updates as you play, depending on what you do. Like if you punch her, it'll say like win the fight. If you try to escape, it'll say like escape from her. Like there's your little sub objective. You can try to do it however you want. And the system knows, here's the scenario, here's your objective, here's the level of tension. Like I said, it has its own secret information, which it may want to or be waiting to tell the player about. And then you can sort of take it wherever you want to go. And eventually the scene ends and then you get a choice of like, what should happen next? What kind of action should you go into after this one?
So one of the earlier things you talked about was really making it feel like the worlds of the authors that you're working with. I'd like to kind of return to that a little bit. What does that mean? Does that mean making it sound like the author's writing style? Is it?
No, actually, not that.
Well, let's talk about what that means in the gameplay.
Yeah. Right. No, it's a wonderful question. And, we have a adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen is an amazing writer, but trying to make the more like her style we made it, the less anyone wanted to read it. And this has been true with other authors we've worked with too, even when they're modern authors who write in a very, concise and clear style. We want it to feel true to that style. Like it can't be discordant, but we're not trying to mimic it necessarily. And tuning that is something our narrative team does a great job of, is sort of figuring out like, what's the right vibe for this? And it's really about more, should it be spooky? Should it be like techie? Should it feel like fantasy, like magical? Should it feel like a action movie? And we do, whether we think about it or not, we have all of these preconceived notions, expectations. We've been trained by the books we've read and the movies we've seen on how the writing should feel for any of those scenarios. And so we try to create that, but even more than the style, which actually isn't the most important thing. And we do, by the way, since we've been talking about the technical underpinnings, we do all of this processing. What should happen? What are the consequences? Are there any like physics we should know about? Did I just try to put a Ferris wheel in my pocket, which was a real bug we had to solve, where the metadata was wrong because it's too large, obviously should not fit in my pocket. But like after all of that, we have the generic language version of what happens, and we call those microbeats in our internal lexicon. And then we do a pass to translate it into the style of the world with the guidance. And that is an LLM call. We're just saying like, here's everything that we've decided happens, write the 2 paragraphs out of these like generic English simple beats. And this is also where we can do language translation at that endpoint to say, here's what happens, make it make sense. Or we could have like simplified English if we wanted to, so we could even let players choose the style they receive it in. It doesn't change anything of the underlying process except that last bit. But what makes you feel immersed in a world? And this is one thing I've learned from working on this project. Every fictional world has a vibe and then some detail that you have to mention in the first like 5 minutes, and then you're there. And so for worlds we're all going to know, like Star Wars, somebody might say the Force or the Jedi, just as an offhand mention one time. It's not even the point of the scene, but it has to be there. For Game of Thrones, they're going to mention winter, or they're going to mention one of the houses. And then you're like, you've sort of checked that off the list. So we spend a lot of time thinking about like, what makes you feel like you're there? Like this incredible romance novel we've been looking at, it's like takes place in modern America. What makes you feel like you're in this city? What makes you feel like you're open to like new love and excitement? Like it's the vibes and the details of it. And every book or every show has there are a couple of those little details that matter.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the tech. Before I do, I just also want to restate what I said at the beginning of our conversation for our audience, because we've got over 400 people watching this live right now. And I see a lot of like fun hello kind of comments in the chat. And hello to all of you. Glad you're all here. There's a really great opportunity here for you to ask Hilary, who is an expert in AI and machine learning and bringing that together with gaming, but she really understands language models and a lot of these systems that we've just been talking about and embeddings and all that and everything that's sort of in that universe. So do use it as an opportunity to post your questions on YouTube or LinkedIn or X or Twitch or Facebook, any of these places that we are, because we're watching this and we'll put it live and on the air and we can ask Hilary those questions. And in fact, if you have a camera, we'll even bring you on live if you want. Oscar can DM you the StreamYard link. We're crazy enough to push those edges as well. So if you want to be part of the live conversation, this is a great opportunity. Like I said at the beginning, though, if you're watching this in replay, which I know that that's probably 99% of you, that's totally great. We're really grateful for the time you're taking to watch this, but think about coming to one of our live shows sometime in the future because you get to participate live. So the tech question that I've got for you, Hilary, though, is we've been kind of talking about a lot of pieces. You said you make an LLM call a moment ago in creating the couple paragraphs. We've talked about your more like CPU driven, kind of optimized, I don't know what the correct words are for that, but a language classifier. You've got embeddings that you use. It sounds, and I think this is maybe the interesting thing for people that are building products and trying to learn from this. First of all, I heard you say you are using LLMs for part of it, but you're not using LLMs for big chunks of it. Is that an optimization decision? Is it because that LLMs are not actually the right thing to use for particular use cases that are important for you?
It's a controllability decision.
Yeah.
So we value quality of experience and controllability over, I guess, ease of prototyping. And given that we've been working on this for 5 years, like no joke, it took a long time. But if you want, again, it's like mediocre plots spit back at you with no control, like use any off-the-shelf LLM, you're gonna spend endless hours in prompt tweaking. And I don't know about you, but like I hate writing prompts. It is not engineering. It is extremely frustrating. And it is not controllable. And so we do a ton of work to manage context so that the few LLM calls we do have exactly the right context, a very clear task, and it is a task that an LLM is good at. And I really believe that they are excellent for translating information from one style to another style, one format to another format, or taking sort of 3 discordant bits of information and pulling them together, but not in making up great writing. Like they're not creative. They are a distillation of the most tropey, mediocre stuff by design. And so
They
I
converge
think a
on
lot of,
averages.
yeah. And so if you want the same dribble everywhere, like an LM is fine. And I also I don't want to like crap on them as much as I am, because like we will often use LLMs to prototype a feature and then decide, okay, this is great for like, we understand what we want now. Now let's do it right. And by do it right, I mean, there are a wide variety of ways to approach any task. I think one of the things I'm actually good at is if you give me a problem, I will give you a solution space of all the machine learning tools and technical approaches you could take, and then we can pick one depending on what you're optimizing for. So if anyone has any of those problems, like find me on the internet or bring them here. We can do like tech therapy. But what we'll do is say, great, like I'll give you an example. Like we have these like narrative beats for a scene. We pre-filter them by understanding their requirements programmatically. Like, do you have a crush? If you don't have a crush, you can't go on a date. Like, So we'll just take all the dates like right out of the pool of content that might happen because you're not in a state. There's nothing in our game engine that says you're eligible for this pool of content yet. And if you do have a crush, like how might that change? Are you going to have a breakup scene? Are you going to have a like let's go on a date scene? Um, and just that layer of like actual programmatic filtering and then throwing only good options with correct context into another model to make a choice, whatever it may be, boosts the quality and the controllability so high that we know what it is. Another thing I'll mention, and I think I said this earlier in one example, we do use LLMs as a fallback if our other systems don't have the right context or metadata or can't come to a conclusion. Is they are an excellent, they are excellent for that. They're sort of like a catch-all in the like, well, you know, it turns out we really don't know what should happen next, or there are 0 options in our content. That'll raise a flag to our team and then it'll try to figure something out. As a placeholder, we'll then come around and actually write the beat that should have been there and off we go. The whole system is better. So I love them. I think they're incredible, but they are not everything for every problem all the time. And I don't know about you, but often when I am interviewing people, they are unaware that there are a variety of other tools one might use. And that's, you know, that leads to like, I've got one hammer and I'm going to use it on everything. And I see honestly a lot of products that probably could have been built more efficiently and with higher quality experiences right now because of that. But again, I'm old and I've been building this stuff a long time.
But not, you're saying not everything needs to be an OpenAI API call to run your language-based system. I'm curious about one of the things that you were just mentioning, though, which is you talked about using LLMs for prototyping. A lot of the time when people talk about prototyping using an LLM, what they're talking about is things like coding copilots, or what has now become known as vibe coding, like just using a coding assistant to help you get to executable code. I'm actually thinking of a different system that I use. So my other co-founder, Ali, one of my other co-founders, Ali, he's our CTO. We went to an A16Z hackathon a couple of years ago, and we used an LLM not to accelerate the coding of this little D&D game that we were making. We used it as a replacement for coding at all. So we actually just said, hey, generate like these modular outputs and give us a package of XML back telling us how the game state was changed. But otherwise, you figure out what a fireball spell is going to mean. We don't feel like coding that. And later, if we need to code it, we will replace that with actual code for performance reasons.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's us. What is that? What you're doing as well? Like, let's talk about your use of LLMs for prototyping, just to give people ideas of like how they can use these technologies. Other than
I love programming with assistants. Like I use Cursor every day. I'm a big fan of Claude Code. I don't let it, like I still need to understand it. But it like just being very serious for a minute, on a startup project, we would not have comprehensive test coverage at this stage of our product. But these tools make it much easier to generate the tests. Therefore, we have much greater test coverage than we otherwise would. This is not in any way like replacing any of the brilliant engineers on our team. But it means that I'm not submitting PRs without any tests and getting like snark from my team for it anymore. I'm like, hey, I can like get the test generated, read over them, be like, okay, this one needs to be fixed. We're good. Let's go. We will often use an LLM to test that. Like, let's consider we break a task out. It's a function. It's a black box. You know what comes in. You know what you want to come out. You can now prototype that with an LLM call. Going to be slow and your quality may be all over the map, but at least you can get your inputs and your outputs. Once that's working, we can then say, okay, what's the right approach to this? Do we want to use any of the other context or metadata we have at this moment of the flow to be like, we can do this better? Do we want to use a different kind of model to get a different kind of result? Do we want to pre-generate content? Do we want to hand write some of that content? And then fill in variables for what's going to happen. We have many options. There are lots of tools in the toolbox. Then it's saying like, okay, what are we optimizing for here? Quality, interpretability, speed, reliability, surprise. Like, we have to consider all that stuff. And then we can do that. Like, we can write modules for different actions or whatever it may be, a bunch of templates. We can write a bunch of tropes and pull them in, or things that might go wrong in those tropes. And then we can have an LLM as the fallback. Like I said, if we're missing some of our handwritten content or the content wasn't right for whatever reason, we can use that. And then we always log it and catch it later to see, okay, this is something someone was trying to do. We should cover that in our system or not. We should block it. We should, whatever it may be. We get a lot of stuff we're going to block. But all of that said, it's super useful as a prototyping technique. And I love like AI assisted programming because the code is not the hard part. It is the modeling of the complex system in my head and the context, and then being able to say like, okay, write this function for me, or fill in the like lines of code that are going to pull some context from over there, and then they're going to pull it from here, combine that data structure, and then process it. Like, that's great. I also happen to be somewhat dyslexic. I'm dysgraphic. And seriously, I can stare at parentheses for hours and not see that one doesn't match the other. So having essentially like a smart autocomplete that gets it right is like, I feel the difference. It is great. Mm-hmm. I like it.
Okay, we're coming up towards the end of our hour. Before we do the close, and I give you a chance to send people off to all the things they should look at to learn about Hidden Door. For the people who are developers here who have been learning, I think we've already dispensed all kinds of wisdom there. We're like, don't look just at like LLM APIs. There's a lot of efficient ways to do things that also potentially give you a lot more control. We've talked about the use of coding assistants now. Big picture, I'm starting a startup today. Clearly, AI has to be something I'm thinking about, or I'm potentially outcompeted by a lot of people who are. What's your startup entrepreneur advice about how to be thinking about AI, whether it's a game business or any kind of business that you're going to create?
So I'm going to say two different things. The first one is that whatever the business is that you're interested in building, the same things matter. So who is the customer? What is the business model? And what is your go-to-market? And like figuring that out. And then the AI bit is that what this tech does is actually change the risk surface area of every decision you're going to make. Because now you're competing against people who are using the tech everywhere, or, it's going to change the cost functions of what you need to actually bring your first product to market. And it's going to do it because it's new-ish in some ways. It's going to do it in a way that means that even if you built a startup 2 years ago, it's different now. So you have to really be critically thinking about what makes sense and what doesn't, and what does the tech actually do? Where does it actually make sense to apply? And think about it in the sense of like, all you do at a startup is like reduce risk. And so what is the next biggest decision for us that is risky? How do I reduce that risk? Is this tech important or not? It often isn't, but sometimes it is. So it's worth thinking about. The other thing I'd say is that it is so important to think about the principles behind your product and your business model, and to make sure that they are in alignment. And this is an AI question because the way the tech is often marketed and used, especially right now, is it's positioned around replacing people's jobs and employment, and it doesn't work that well. So you have to think critically for yourself about the design of your product experience, whether it's a game or something else, how people are going to find you. That's the go-to-market piece, what your distribution is, what that's going to cost you, and then design your business and your revenue model to be something you're going to be proud of. Like, that's something that is really about respecting the people you respect and sort of bringing them along with you in that business model. And it is really easy for technologists to sort of forget about the business piece. And I think really easy for folks on the business side to want to optimize for cash and not sort of think about the downstream long-term consequences. So this is my fourth company, so I feel like I can have an opinion on this. Like, it's all one problem, and if you're founding something, you have to think through it all, and AI just makes it harder, not easier. So have fun. It's great.
That's what we're all here for.
Best job ever.
That's why we do startups, right? So that was absolutely sage advice. How to do a startup in 2025. So I think we're going to save that clip and make sure that one gets out for
Awesome.
sure out of all this content. Hilary, where should people go to learn more about Hidden Door? You've gone a little dark recently, right? Like
We have. So hiddendoor.co, sign up for the waitlist. And if you are in our Discord, you will get into play as early as next week. And a whole big thing is coming this summer. So come play with us.
Sounds like find your Discord, get in there and pay attention, and then you can get in. Okay.
Yeah, or sign up for our waitlist, hiddendoor.co, and you'll be towards the beginning.
Awesome. Hilary, thank you so much for joining me for the last hour and talking about AI and LLMs and gaming and entrepreneurship and startups. We packed a hell of a lot into this hour. So
yes, we did. Thank you.
And so grateful for all of you who tuned in, especially the live audience. You've taken the last hour of your life. We're peaking here at about 500 people live watching this. So we love all of you, and we also love you watching it on replay as well. Please keep tuning into these if you enjoy this, and make sure you follow me, follow Hilary. Where can they follow you as well if they want to just track what you're doing and go stalker mode on Hidden Door?
Yeah, probably on LinkedIn. We're sharing a ton of stuff about Hidden Door, and also on Blue Sky. I'm H. Mason.
Outstanding. Okay, Hilary, this was great. Until next time, really enjoyed it. We'll have you on again in the future and learn how everything's gone. Thanks, everybody, for showing up today. This has been great. Until next time, folks.
Thank you.